fifth grade. Really ain't no difference if that nigga gay.
Blood satellite.
It's Bam Margera. I haven't talked to you in a while because I got my phone taken away 200 days ago in Phoenix, Arizona. I got hit over the head with a beer bottle and then somebody stole it. So I was knocking on random doors in Phoenix with a bloody head, asking them to call 911 for me. But they were calling 911 at me. So when you get 4 911 calls by 4 different people with a guy with a bloody head not knowing where he is, you get sent to a mental institution. So I got sent to one of those for 72 hours. Then they put me in a Mesa, Arizona hospital for 6 days. I couldn't leave the room. Then from there, they transferred me to Sarah, Tucson, which I did over 100 days at. And then I got transferred to Tampa, Florida at board prep. I lasted 2 weeks there and escaped, did outpatient for 10 days, and now I'm back in a rehab now in Florida for manic bipolar disorder, not for alcohol this time. But now I find out that I checked in. I was set up and sabotaged. I checked 2 VIP suites to the Don Julio Hotel or some the fancy one in Clearwater. I got 2 of the VIP joining suites at the top. I was gonna see my wife and kid who I haven't seen in a half of a year to hug the out of them. Then a minute goes by and the police are knocking on the door. They handcuff me and take me back to a rehab, which the judge ordered another month or something like that, which I'm already halfway done. But anyway, I just found out that there is a new article coming out saying that I was caught in my room at the hotel with a prostitute. It was my 65-year-old aunt, Missy Dampierre.
Bam Margera is the type of guy who really needs Alcoholics Anonymous, though. And I, as someone who actually did go to AA, like that was, I went like a few times, but I stopped. It's not that good.
Fell off the wagon, or it's not for you. You think it's more for guys like Bam?
Yeah. Well, so like I haven't had any drinks at all for like 10 months now, 10, 11 months. And, so, you know, a lot of people, when they stop drinking, they do starts and stops. And I did the thing where I was like, oh, I'm cutting back. And I had cut back, but I'm just like, I was still doing like binges on weekends and stuff. So I'm like, I'm just going to stop doing this. And it actually very, very hard near the end. So I just wanted to give it a shot because I'd heard a lot of people say that AA is not good, and they have their reasons. And I'm sure they're valid reasons. But I'm like, I'm going to give it a shot because I'm not one of these guys who thinks that it's like, they're trying to smuggle Christianity into you. And then you have to like believe in God. And let me just, first of all, you don't actually. For anyone who wants the inside scoop, and maybe this is biased to me because of my experience in more of a modern guy and where I'm living in Canada. But, you know, if you go look up AA meetings, there's a lot of secular ones. And there's a lot of, you can imagine, there's a lot of atheists who quit drinking who are like, I don't want to do that. So because anyone can start one of these meetings. There's no real central, there kind of is, but not really. So you can go to one where it's like, we don't believe in God. You don't have to submit to God, but they have their kind of Reddity sciencey thing, like, oh, it's about yourself and your higher power, or however you defined it. Maybe your higher power is democracy. Maybe your higher power is Hillary Clinton, you know, that sort of shit, whatever. So you can do that. Like, it's not a brainwashing thing. And I stopped going, not because I have really anything bad to say about it. And there's a lot of people who might have very negative things to say. My policy, just to lead with this, is, you know, anything that has positive effects has positive effects. And that's the beginning, middle, and end of it. So for me, if I say like, oh, you know, the success rate is 5%, 10% or higher or lower or whatever it is, I'm like, well, that doesn't mean destroy. That means it's not perfect. But like, if those 5% of people need it and it helps them, well, good. Like, I'm not going to, you know, throw water all over that. Right. So, you know, but I do agree that there's a lot of people who get it. Most of the people who get into it and have bad things to say about it, and this is kind of the central thing I'm getting to, are people who weren't actually alcoholics. So what? And these are guys who might maybe have a bit of a drinking problem, but they can get it under control And so they don't like it. They don't like the idea of having to invest so much of yourself into it, or they like the idea of being a drunk. And they like that, there's guys can like to be victims too, by the way. Guys can be like, oh my God, I'm such a broken, twisted guy. So they go there and like, I'm not, fuck you guys. I'm no one's a master over me. And to them, I'd say, well, it's not for you. Who it's for is someone like Bam Margera. So, and wait, I think I cut you off there. Were you about to say something?
No.
Okay. So the way I explain this to people, and maybe this is scientifically inaccurate, whatever, but it helps me, is that I think Sam Harris, or one of the neuroscience guys, talked about this, is like when you look at the mind of an addict, and we've talked about this before, about, when you learn something, you learn a skill or you learn a trade, or your brain makes a connection, you can see under an electron microscope how the brain reacts to that. Like your brain actually physically changes shape every time you learn something. So it's not like memories are just this kind of free floating, airy fairy thing. Your brain actually changes its neural pathways when it makes a new association, when it makes a new, benefit association in your brain. Like, oh, this leads to something good, do more of this. So the way I think of it, and we see like a homeless person on the street who's a crack addict, a heroin addict, a pill addict, whatever it is, it's because after so much time, they've reconfigured all of their neural pathways to lead to one thing. So you can make, reward mechanisms in your everyday life for things like working out, for eating healthy, for things like that. They train your mind, train your body in a physical, scientific way to associate positive things with a good feeling. So that's the real thing. They've just gotten so twisted up and turned around that every single reward mechanism in their brain leads to one thing, and that's getting heroin or getting drunk. So whenever you wake up every day, your brain knows that's the only goal. Yeah. And everything is in service of that. And that's why when you talk to junkies, they get whimsical about their life too, and talk about, oh, it's kind of cool having missions every day. You wake up and you got to go on a mission to get money, but it's just to get heroin. That's the pot of gold at the end of every decrepit rainbow for them. Mm-hmm. So if you are a very serious addict, if you are like a decade in and you've kind of worked yourself up so much that everything in your life is just about getting drunk, you need to kind of reinvent yourself. You need to knock the pillars out of that house and build a new fucking house. So for a lot of people who don't get anything out of AA, I'm like, yeah, you probably don't. You could probably quit on your own. You could probably learn enough discipline and learn enough tricks to get it under control or stop completely. But there are people out there who literally don't know how. Like they can't do it. They don't know how to exist unless they're inebriated on their substance of choice, and their entire life is built around that. And that's kind of what it's for. It kind of gives you the sledgehammer to knock down those pillars and like, okay, we got to start over with you. And then what I noticed was I realized that, okay, like as bad as I was getting near the end, and I was getting very bad in the sense that I was getting what we call the DTs, like you're sweating and you're shaking and things like that. And you feel like you're dying. And when you feel like that, people think, oh my God, I should go to the hospital. And I would say no, because when you get like that, you also want to die because you're in such a state where you're like, I feel pathetic. I feel like a loser. Maybe I should die. This is what it should. And then you eventually get out of that. But you eventually do start seeing booze as medicine. And that's a weird thing for people where it's like the only reason you're drinking isn't actually to get drunk. It's because you need to stop shaking. And it's like, I need to go about my day. So I need to drink. So, and it's medicine. And you'll catch yourself calling it that, and you'll think it's kind of funny sometimes. But that's how you see it. So you're not even enjoying it at that point. And that's a position you get into. And it's very easy to get into that position for people, by the way. So here's the pathway to get to that. So you have a night out drinking. Maybe it's St. Patrick. It's actually easy to see this if you think of St. Patrick's Day or like a holiday where you drink a lot the night before. And then you're like, oh my God, I feel like shit the next day. And you hate that feeling. And then you're like, oh my God, what will make me feel better? Well, there will come a time where you do this long enough and you realize, actually, if I have a couple drinks in the morning, I feel way better. I don't want to throw up and I can actually eat and keep food down. Well, now you're day drinking. Now you're drinking for across 2 days. and then maybe go a bit too far, especially if you're on vacation, and then the hangovers just follow with you, right? And they increase in severity, and then now you can see how you can get to drinking for a week straight. And again, by the end of it, you're not enjoying it. You're just trying to put gas in the engine. And there's this guy named Doug Stanhope, a comedian, a pretty famous comedian, a guy I like. But if you're a drunk, you tend to like other drunks and other alcoholics because you try to reinforce your worldview. Like, oh my God, all these great world leaders and all these celebrities, they're drunks too. They're substance abusers and they're great. So there's hope for me. Like you normalize it in a lot of ways. And so with Doug Stanhope, he uses language of an alcoholic because he is like he's open about like how he doesn't even go to the doctor anymore. He doesn't care. But he had used the term maintenance drinking. I'm like, that's what it is. It's maintenance drinking. It's like you're not getting drunk, but you actually need to taper off. So you're drunk, but you kind of need to edge yourself down and wean yourself off. So it's like you're controlling your drinking like you're landing a plane. And that's when I'm like, oh, that's it. That's what it is. So someone like Bam would need something like that, where I look at him in some of his videos where he's so deep into it. I know what a week and a half bender looks like. That's it, where he doesn't know whether he's coming or going. He's tired all the time, but he's angry. You're in this state of like gray rot. But then you're in that position where everyone's just giving you more money. Because the thing that would make you stop eventually is like you run out of money. But if you don't run out of money, well, why wouldn't you keep going? There's other guys who ended up dying. Joey Jordison, the drummer from Slipknot, and the lead singer of Children of Bodom, who is a band I like. I'm trying to get his name right. Children of Bodom. I think his name's Alexi Laiho. Yeah, these are two guys, pretty young guys in their 40s, who just like drank themselves to death. And you could see it on their face near the end, where it's just like they look like walking corpses. And it's just, it gets your liver and you just end up in a destitute place. But just back to AA, let me say one thing, that one of the reasons, because the way I quit things is, anyway, I hope people don't think this is boring. I just want to give, kind of an insider scoop of what it was like, because I quit drinking and I also quit smoking cigarettes. I smoked for a long time, smoked very heavily for a long time. And the way I knew I could quit things is I'm like, if I quit something for 3 weeks, that I'm pretty much out of it. And I think there's actually some science and some medical literature to back that up. But the idea is that if you can set you can set any habit for yourself, I think, after doing something for 3 weeks. And that includes going to the gym, working out. That was COVID, by the way. You get people to wear masks for 3 weeks, it's set. And I knew that once this started. I'm like, once we passed the 3 week mark, I'm like, damn, like there's going to be no pushback on this. Anyway, I think that's maybe a give or take a week, but that's it. So I knew with drinking and with cigarettes, like if I can just kind of tough it out for 3 weeks, the hardest part is done. And then it's just kind of not lying to yourself and saying, oh, I can just have one. But that's how I quit smoking cigarettes. And I did it fast. So with AA, I'm like, I stuck with it I didn't even enjoy it. And then I kind of stuck with them like, okay, I need to be able to take my mind off this. And this would be my criticism of AA. And I don't want to be unfair to them. And I do think people need it. I think certain people need it more than others. But for me, and I was pretty bad, but for me, keeping alcohol at the forefront of your mind all the time kind of sets you up for failure. So for me, I never really talked much in these, but one thing I noticed was that everyone in these meetings had other things wrong in their lives. That's kind of what I was getting at earlier. So there's a lot of people who would come to these meetings who were also, in their words, sex addicts and drug addicts, and they're gambling addicts, right? So you look at them and you say, oh, drinking's just one part of the smorgasbord of catastrophes that is your life, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, there's that. But then like a lot of them are just kind of shitty people. I know that sucks to say and you don't want to hear it, but there's a lot of guys there who I could tell have problems with their ego. Guys who are drinking, but the world's so full of idiots. It's so full of stupid people. And I just need to drink because everyone's stupid. It's like, well, no, you're a fucking failure. You're not smarter. I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I know I'm smarter than you. Like this, you're an idiot. You're actually a dumb asshole. And so, but they have these other personality defects. I noticed a lot of them. Like there was one guy, and I'm doing the thing you're not supposed to do, which is talking about what goes on in AA. But the one rule, it's like, you know, I joined Fight Club, and the first thing I do is like make a Fight Club public group. First rule is I forget the first two rules, but I'm not mentioning names in it. But there was one guy, older guy, retired. And this was during COVID, so they had Zoom meetings. You can go into an AA Zoom meeting. I don't know if they have them anymore, but you could actually do it from home, which I think helped a lot of people. This guy would go to like 12 meetings a day. What? So he could log on and go to AA meetings across the country, because you can search them up by province, by country. Like he was telling stories like, you know, today I went to one AA meeting like across North America, and then like he was very proud of this. I'm like, I don't understand you.
It's like his Telegram.
Yeah.
Fucking Alcoholics Anonymous. Oh my God.
A lot of them treat it like that. And that's kind of what I'm getting at. Like a lot of them have, I think, an unhealthy relationship with it. And I think I don't want to lay too much on the feet of AA. Like they're not here to fix everything wrong with you, of course. But there are a lot of people that just treat it as like a hangout with their friends, which is fine. But then there's a lot of people who treat it in a very kind of parasocial way, and they don't have anything else in their lives, and maybe things they should be addressing. And also, like, the one thing I disagree with AA, and people can push back on me with this, but it's something I think is true, which is saying that you're always an alcoholic. You're always broken. I have a disease and I'm never cured. And there's truth to that, in the sense that it's always something you got to kind of contend with. But also, like, I think you're setting people up to fail if you say there's no way out of this. Like there needs to be, and again, people can push back on me, but I'm like, you have to at least give people a light at the end of the tunnel to say, I'm not an alcoholic anymore, or I'm better somehow, or I'm in some new phase of my life where like I beat it. Like with like you do that with cancer. With cancer, especially a lot of the more severe cancers, like stage 3 cancers, they know that cancer is always coming back. Cancer is always on your horizon. It sucks to say, and it's a terrible thing to live with. But for a lot of cancer survivors, you can operate on it. You can do the chemotherapy, and it'll go away. But they're like, on a long enough timeline, it's going to come back. However, you still say you beat cancer. You don't say I'm cancerous forever, because they know that weighs on you. That seems like a way to sabotage not only your own happiness, but your own productivity, your own relationships. So I'm like, I need to be able to say that, look, I know this is a thing that I can be bad with and get out of control, but I need to be able to say that I am at a better place now than I was. And if you're denying me that, then I'm always going to be talking about it. And I think that's kind of the problem I got into with these groups, is like, I need to get to a place where I'm not fucking talking about it. Like, it really doesn't come up much on the show. I don't bring it up with other people. And some people like doing that. Some people are like, oh no, Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm an alcoholic. I can't do that because I'm diseased. You know, like I don't bring it up. And I'm in a position where people offer me drinks all the time. I just say, no, I'm okay. But some people really want to wear that as a badge of honor. Mm-hmm. But I'm like, I need to be able to say, I need to be able to not talk about this every single day. I need to not have this at the forefront of my mind. I need to get on with my life.
Yeah.
Because if this is something that's always in the forefront of my mind, it's like, I think I'm increasing the likelihood that I'm just going to just buy a bunch of vodka again.
Yeah.
Because now I'm in a position where I just forget about it. Like I'll be like 6 months in, like, oh yeah, I haven't had a drink in 6 months. I need to be able to disengage from that part of it. And I think that's actually better for a lot of people. Whereas at a certain point, I think you're just locking yourself in a room and forcing yourself to talk about drinking once or multiple times a week, whereas otherwise you might not. Anyway, This is just something I had noticed. That's why I stopped going. And I just
there's loads of people that just don't drink, like as a matter of habit or culture, for literally no reason. Like I know I have lots of friends who just don't drink because their parents never drank, and they rationally think that drinking is silly. So, I mean, it's not weird. It's not like you have to bring it up. Yeah.
Sorry, I cut. My wife was saying something. Sorry, can you read that very quickly?
No, I just said I had lots of friends here that are not, I mean, they don't drink at all. And there's no reason There's no like cultural or religious reason. It's just like not drinking. It's expensive, and I don't really want to. Whatever. I'll just have a soda. Like it's not like you have to have a fucking. It's no. I have AIDS, guys. I can't drink because I have AIDS. No.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing. Unless you want to, I want to have the chips. I want to tell people, because some people put that. This is, I guess, back to the jackass thing in a little bit. Like that is kind of what Steve-O does. Like we're the sober crew. We used to be, and like Steve-O, it's like, okay, yeah, you drank a lot and you did whippets. Like you did nitrous oxide. We used to do whippets. We used to do whippets all the fucking time. And yeah, it's bad for you, but it's like, I don't want to make that central to my identity. I need to be able to say, as a man, if I got 5 things that define me as a man, I don't want one of them to be that I got to be careful around certain things, because I still look at it like I can't handle my booze. That's kind of how I conceptualize it for myself. It's like, I don't want to embarrass myself. So but I want to be other things more.
When I come back, if we're going to go hang out at a pub, I'm going to introduce people to you as, he did a lot of whippets when he was 18. This is Dimes.
Whippets.
Yeah, this is Dimes.
I'm trying to find retarded things to get into again. So I'm thinking like, yeah, let's just start taking pharmaceutical pills randomly. Like I'm trying to get into lean actually.
I'm thinking of getting into lean.
I'm thinking of getting into lean like years after any. I just saw a fucking Complex video from that website, like millions and millions of views, where it was like, I thought this was a Photoshop screen capture, but it was old people try lean for the first time.
Oh no.
It's from 7 years ago. And I'm like, this is still up? They're probably dead now because of drinking lean. Like you can't.
I think I've barely heard of lean, yes. It's a mixture of something, but that's it.
Lean I never heard of before today.
Oh, thank you.
Just take a sip is what you're saying?
I may have to go out and pee if I drink this much.
Even back then, like that's a thing black people find hilarious. Like, we're going to get you hooked on drugs. No, thank you. You're not supposed to find this funny. But yeah, I guess that was just my feelings. Not feelings. I don't want to say, I'm trying to get feelings out of my vocabulary, by the way.
Yeah.
I was telling that to my wife the other day. I'm like, she was talking about how men speak in an effeminate way. Or we were talking about how women speak. I'm like, yeah, there's a lot more men these days who say things like, I feel like, that, like, I feel like this. I feel like this is bad. I feel like I don't like this. Like I caught myself doing it because I work around women and you kind of just absorb their speech patterns. And I'm like, no, why the fuck do I say that? I need to get out of that habit. Anyway, but yeah, I wanted to say that about the substance abuse, which is interesting. It's I think though also here's 2 things that help me conceptualize it, because if you are this type of person, what you really have is a problem with discipline, and what you really have. Actually, there's a few things. So just I've talked about this on the podcast before, but 3 things about this. So one is that my brain actually processes alcohol in a different way. I took a drug for a while called naltrexone. It's a drug called naltrexone, and it's a pill you take that before you drink that actually changes how your brain processes being drunk.
There is a drug, if you're a binge drinker, there is a drug called naltrexone that you could consider, and you take naltrexone every day. It doesn't really have any psychological effect on you, but if you're a naltrexone responder, what will happen is that it will dampen your positive response to alcohol. So some people who are alcoholic, many of them have a very pronounced opiate effect from alcohol. It looks like it's mediated by beta endorphin, and naltrexone is an opiate blocker. And so what naltrexone seems to do is dampen the positive response. And the positive response, which would be opiate and then dopaminergic.
So for me, and I've tested this with the drug, so I know it's actually true. When I take a drink, it's something closer to like taking a line of Coke. So a lot of people take a drink and it makes you feel a bit relaxed and smooth and cool and stuff. When I do it, it makes me feel like if you've ever done coke, for anyone who's done cocaine, you want to spend all your money on cocaine when you're doing it. You want to keep going up and up and up and up and up and maintain that upswing, because you get it's almost like you go on ecstasy or something. So a lot of people just don't have that. And I tried this drug, and I very viscerally changed how I felt about when I was drunk. I felt kind of like, oh, this is what it's like. And then I actually didn't want to keep drinking. I actually said, wow, I've had enough. Now, here's the question you ask yourself. Why did I go off that drug? Because I had the solution. This was years and years ago. I had the solution. And I said, oh my God, like this solves everything. But I stopped going on that drug because I actually liked how being drunk was before. I liked that feeling. So there's the problem. The problem with the drinking was that I was actually given a magic pill and I didn't want to take, or I forgot about it. I didn't make a conscious effort not to do it, but I forgot about it. The other thing I realized, it's like people say, "Oh, don't you want to drink? You can have one drink." I'm like, "Yeah, I could. I actually can have one drink. I've done it before. I just don't actually like it. What I like is being drunk.
Yeah.
I don't like having a drink. Having one drink to me is actually nothing. Okay, I can do it. I'm just frustrated now because it reminds me of what I want to do, which is have 12 drinks."
Yeah.
And I know what having 12 drinks, that's fun to me, but it's being drunk. So when they're like,
what you actually want to do is jump on the hood of a car and hit someone in the head with a bat. Like, that's what you actually want. That's what's fun. Yeah.
The thing that's fun to me, and a lot of people have this problem. That's kind of what I'm talking about, is like, you think you actually like drinking. What you like is losing control. And so I had to kind of look at myself and realize, oh, this thing I like. So they're like, oh, you can have one drink. So you always have that in your head. I could have one drink. And you're thinking, oh, but I'm not going to have one drink. I'm going to have 10 drinks because I don't want one drink. And once you realize that I don't want that, then things make more sense. Then you're thinking, okay, this is going to be a day-long commitment. Do I actually want to commit a fucking day and maybe 2 days to this? I'm like, well, no. Once I phrase it like that, that sounds crazy. You know what I mean? Like, that sounds like an insane thing to want. So I don't do it. And here's another tip that I use for myself. I don't know if this helps with other people, but one thing that becomes apparent, and this will sound very defeatist, but I think it's true. One thing that becomes apparent when you spend time in these programs and with these people is that relapses happen. Relapses are inevitable. And I think people get too hard on themselves when they relapse. Like, if you haven't drank it for 10 years and you fall off the wagon and you need to start all over again, you have this, oh my God, I was on a streak and I ruined the streak and now I got to go back to zero. That type of thinking makes it more likely that you will draw off that falling off the wagon. You know what I mean? So let's say you were clean for 10 years and you slip up once and you're like, oh my God, I ruined my streak. Well, I guess I better, while I'm here, because I have to start all over again. Like, don't view it like that. Don't view it like starting all over again. You slip up, just get back on the fucking horse. Don't be like, oh, I've been defeated, so I'm going to spend another month just being down here in the muck. But also, I for me to conceptualize it, I say, okay, odds are I'm going to relapse. Let me control that. Let me say, one day I am going to start drinking again, but I'm going to start drinking when I'm 50. You know what I mean? Like, I kind of I admit, because this idea of having to maintain perfection, I think is defeatist. I think that's what really gets people anxious. Like, oh my God, I can never have a drink forever. And then you snap. But if I say, I am going to start drinking again, but I'm going to do it when I'm retired, and then I'm going to go nuts, or I'm going to do it when I'm 45. And then once you get to 45, then you make another bargain with yourself. Like, oh my God, you know what? I do miss drinking, but you know what? I'm going to push it ahead. You know what?
Yeah.
I'm going to go hog wild when I'm 50, 55. Just keep you kind of, if you're a substance abuser or have experience with that, you are very good at bullshitting people. You're very good at bullshitting yourself and your others. So I just turned that on myself. I know I'm bullshitting myself, but it actually makes it easier rather than maintaining this perfection, which I think is what fucks a lot of people up. Anyway, sorry, I think I cut you off there.
No, it's just when you're 55, you're going to take a year off, change your name, go to Mexico, just fucking lay around in the sand with the scorpions, drinking tequila and fucking getting kicked in the face by an ass, and just, it's perfect. It's like, that's your plan. Like, that's your retirement plan. Is to just be homeless and die.
No, that's it. Like, I want to live at the end of There Will Be Blood. I want to be alone, and I'm going to be like, you know what? I got all my ducks in a row. I accomplished everything. I'm going to run this into the ground. And whether or not I do or not, I can believe in that fantasy where I'm in my own house, covered in grease and sweat, shooting my own furniture. And that's a dream, and that's a dumb thing to think, and it's probably not going to happen. But that allows me to just go about my life with this little compromise.
Yeah.
Anyway, I wanted to talk about this today. We only have a little bit of time. This won't be like a big, long thing, but I wanted to talk about this book I read, continuing on the arc of speaking of our financial stuff, our financial topics. We talked about game theory, first of all, and how that mathematical decision-making process works. Then we talked about the history of financial speculation and the boom-bust cycle, explaining why it is that people actually invest, why the stock market actually exists, what are the maybe deeper reasons why we do this. And then I read this book, a very fascinating book called The Misbehavior of Markets, A Fractal View of Financial Turbulence, by Benoit Mandelbrot. So if you're into math, if you're into science, Mandelbrot, this name will come up. You know, this is a guy who's associated with chaos theory. This is a guy who's associated with mathematics. He kind of exists with two hemispheres of his body in different rooms. You know, he is this math guy. He's a serious academic guy, but a lot of his writing has had to do with the financial market, with economics.
So it was in 1875, 1825, an extraordinary period in which mathematics prepared itself to break out from the world. And the objects which were used as examples when I was a child and a student, as examples of the break between mathematics and visible reality, those objects, I turned them completely around. I used them for describing some of the aspects of the complexity of nature.
And for a long time, he was pushing this theory all throughout, I believe, the 80s and the 90s about his fractal view of how economics works. And everyone thought he was crazy. No one wanted to listen to him. He's gotten a lot more popular recently. And I just wanted to explore this theory and maybe do a few readings from this book just to kind of establish on our way to the finale of this thing about not necessarily the human element of the financial market, of stocks and trading and how we assign value to companies and things like that. But like, take a step back and take the macro view. So we're used to taking the micro view. Like, let's look at the exact types of personalities and the people and the trades and look on a very, very small view. He actually steps back and let's just look at the graph. Let's look at the graph and how the graph behaves. And let's change different ways we look at the graph, this broken line graph we call, stock valuation, and see if there's any way we can look at this as if it's an entity in itself, right? And exists. Can we have any sort of predictive model that says how this works, not even paying attention to what the companies are, what the people are, and just maybe use that to forecast long term? And that's kind of what he's coming at. So he's coming out just from hard numbers and hard data. So I'm just going to kind of go through some of the points he brings up, and maybe we can discuss them, and you can jump in at any time, obviously. So he kind of starts with how markets themselves are not rational and they have unique personalities and forms of volatility compared to others. So when we talk about the stock market, he's not talking about the stock market in every stock. He's talking about the market price of corn, the market price of tech stocks, the market price of, once you break the stock market down into very smaller markets, each one of those markets has its own personality. So you can't judge, the entire Dow Jones or anything, but you can actually look at, I can tell from 100 years of data how unique the price of wheat is. And I could actually kind of break that down, but only apply it to that. Now, and this flies in the face of a lot of traditional economics throughout the 20th century. Said they thought that, and this is kind of what, what's that fucking, Milton Friedman thought that traditional economics dictates that all the prices are set independently every day. And that during that, the magic of the market, the mind and spirit of the market, it not only resets the prices every day and judges them accurately, but it also says this is based on all available information. This is why they see the market as almost just a giant supercomputer, that it actually doesn't, it's not prone to manipulation. It's not prone to gaming the system. It's actually this giant computer made of millions and millions of minds that accurately sets prices, and you can't really argue against it. Whereas he says that these markets are actually different, the markets actually have long memories, and that the previous day affects today, and today will affect the future, and long stretches will affect future stretches. And that you can't actually model the data on something like a bell curve, where by that I mean that there's actually, if you look at all the data, you can have sort of a standard in the middle, like here's how it usually acts, and then the fringe stuff doesn't really matter on the edges. He's saying it's the opposite, and that like the market itself as an entity, you can map trends over time, whereas traditional economics says no, it's this amazing supercomputer that sets prices every day.
Now, as I understand it, the Bachelier theory implies that returns follow what we all commonly know as the bell curve, that most things will be clustered in the middle and there'll be just a few wider movements at either end of the scale. What did your research tell you once you started taking a look at this, which is in the early 1960s, I believe?
That the tails in question, which are so completely impossible to draw because they're so thin, just a few events, the tails are extremely long. And that a record one looks at can seem to be just small steps up and down, and then one gigantic step. And the gigantic step itself is very often, in a certain sense, segregated. Market stops trading. Trading stops and then resumes at a different value. The question arises, do you take this big, enormous jump as part of the process, or do you say it's an act of God, depending upon different rules? If you say it's an act of God, it fits in Bachelier if you wish, because you have put all the big events under the carpet.
But those big events are actually what matters most about markets, aren't they?
Absolutely.
And so he says, he calls these types of people chartists. So a chartist study patterns in prices and data, and others believe that the news and current events inform it, and that modern financial people believe in mathematical laws and chance. And this is where you get kind of game theory, where it's not really based on information and stuff like that. It's based off of just like pure chance and betting and things like that. Where it's like you actually, and with this model, what's interesting is they're saying you can't actually predict prices themselves, but you can predict fluctuations. Now that's interesting. So a lot of people are like the chartists are trying to drill down on I want to figure out how to predict the price. I want to predict what the exact price will be next year or 2 years from now. But they're saying, no, we're actually just trying to pay attention to the giant swings it might take. So while we can't predict on a very granular level what a stock will be, we can actually tell whether or not it's going to go up or down and by how much. And that might not be as specific as they want, but he says that's actually more useful. And that might be as good as we can get in stock market prediction. And he says traditionally, this is what they would do. What they would do is they're not very good at predictive models. What economists and financial guys like to do is look at the past and find anomalies and trends in things. But the trick is, a lot of economists will tell you this, once you identify a trend in the market and start talking about it, you talking about that trend destroys the trend, right? Yeah. So it's kind of like the quantum uncertainty principle. Like the more we talk about the stock market, the more we learn, the more it changes. So you can never actually get a specific razor's edge grasp on what it's going to be, because the more we try and grasp it, the more it slips through our fingers.
Right.
That's kind of where he's coming at. And the reasoning behind this is about, when you look at it just from a mathematical scientific point of view, we have this thing called streaks. And this is where gambling addicts actually have a really good point. Now, we look at gambling addicts like they're crazy. Like, I'm on a hot streak, I'm on a cold streak. We say there's no such thing as streaks. It's completely random every time. You don't know. But that's not actually true. Streaks exist. And like, if you toss a coin 10,000 times and you chart what it is, you will see patterns appear. And we don't know why, because you would think it'd just be random or it might be evenly split. But what you'll find over 10,000 times, you'll have like 2,000 times where it's all heads. It's just so the idea of something being random, we tend to think that means more mixed up, but random actually means that you will have streaks and trends and groupings of things. And this is why he comes at the stock market from more of an outsider mathematical scientific point of view, but that's evident in nature. That's also evident in the clustering of galaxies and planets. That if you take, why would the financial market operate in a way irrespective of nature? See what I'm saying? Like it's still people. People are still natural. The fact of the matter is that there are certain trends and certain things tend to cluster, but you're not actually very good at predicting it. However, if we look at the financial market, if we look at all economics from a sort of a naturalistic point of view, that, okay, we know that this isn't some perfect rational system. We know there's such a thing as clusters. We know that trends exist and we don't actually understand the trends, but knowing these two things gives us a better macro model of seeing what the future is, like something that can, he makes a good point that while these things tend to cluster, it's also the irregular things that destroy everything. One thing he had said is that he was charting the volatility of the yen against the dollar. So the yen being measured, the value of the yen against the value of the dollar between 1986 and 2003, the yen became more and more popular, right? But it spent most of that time flatlining. The huge differences in how the leaps and bounds that the yen accrued value only took place on 0.21% of selling days. So that's kind of how the financial market works, that while we're trying to chart trends, we're also trying to operate in a way where we know that there's going to be huge changes that are almost totally unpredictable. And we need to be able to at least try and see those coming. And the only way we can kind of see those coming is if we're aware of kind of the broad strokes of how the market moves. Because a traditional financial market would mean that, oh, there's no such thing as crashes. Why would there be a crash? Because it resets every day. That's not true. And that huge changes in valuation and like the entire countries rise and fall in a couple days. That's kind of what we're getting at. Like George Soros broke the Bank of England in like what, a week? So you have these huge things that happen, these cataclysms that happen. He also talks about like the unpredictability of when he talks about turbulence. Now, this is something a lot of people don't know, that, despite the fact that we have planes, despite the fact that we have airplanes, that we have all this stuff, that skyscrapers and everything, we actually don't know much about air turbulence.
After more than a century of studying turbulence, we've only come up with a few answers for how it works and affects the world around us. And yet, turbulence is ubiquitous, springing up in virtually any system that has moving fluids. That includes the airflow in your respiratory tract, the blood moving through your arteries, and the coffee in your cup as you stir it. Clouds are governed by turbulence, as are waves crashing along the shore, and the gusts of plasma in our sun. Understanding precisely how this phenomenon works would have a bearing on so many aspects of our lives.
We know it exists, but we can't predict it. So we've tried like making models in controlled conditions in labs, and turbulence is just a thing that happens. We don't know what causes it. We can't control for it. We know it exists. We know it can happen. We actually can't predict when it'll happen. We can only deal with it when it happens. So I think the idea is that you want to kind of build a financial market that takes turbulence in mind. So, and knowing that you can never understand it, knowing that you can never really understand all the components that go into a crash, you just have to know that a crash is going to happen. It will be irrational sometimes, but the fact of the matter is we still have planes. We built planes with turbulence in mind. We didn't make weak planes and try and predict where turbulence is going to be. We just made stronger planes to withstand turbulence, even though we don't fucking understand it, even though we don't really understand flipping the coin, what causes these streaks. We just have to operate in a world where it's okay not understanding how it works, but not understanding how it works doesn't mean it doesn't exist from a practical point of view.
Right.
I'll give one other example. So maybe I'm laboring this point. I can't talk too much on it because we have to get going soon. But he was talking about magnets. That was kind of interesting. A contrary approach, macroscopic instead of microscopic, stochastic instead of deterministic, would be more fruitful. The theory of magnets is worth mentioning here. When temperature rises above a certain critical level called the Curie point, magnetism disappears. As the metal is cooled back down, below that point, magnetism returns. This in a matter of nanoseconds. How? Despite 2 centuries of research, we still do not know why precisely, but we have macroscopic theories for it that work very well. In flat magnets, a chemist who is also a mathematician and physicist, Lars Onsager, drew immense insights from a ludicrously simple model. Imagine a magnet's subatomic particles as arrayed in a grid like traffic lights on street corners in New York City. Each light can be in one of 2 states, called up or down spin. When they are more or less aligned, you get more or less strong magnetism. When they're all working at cross purposes, you lose it. As the temperature rises, extra energy swamps the grid and knocks the spins out of the alignment. As it falls, neighboring lights start cooperating. The math for this is very straightforward in principle, but in practice, devilish enough for a Nobel Prize. Now, this is a simple theory. Fortunately, how and why each individual particle interacts with the next happens no matter what you might think. It doesn't actually matter why they spin. It doesn't matter why they turn up and down. All we know is that they do. And we know, it's that doesn't mean we can't work with magnets is what I'm saying. You know what I mean? Like a lot of science is like that. We don't actually know why this is, but we know the effect it has. And that's good enough. I'm going to skip part of this here. It goes into the sort of financial history. He says 3 systems have built modern finance. There's modern portfolio theory, which is what is risk, capital asset price model, which is what an asset is worth, and the black skulls, which is what is risk worth. The idea is that the modern financial market, and we talked about this in the last episode, but we're trying to establish what value is. How do we know when things are valuable? Well, modern financial theory in a lot of ways is already just trying to measure risk. Like an investment is risky. It doesn't really matter what the company is. It doesn't really, but it matters like on prices on a sheet, whether or not it's volatile and how we can group different types of volatility together. And this is kind of how you get the housing market and things like that. But when people talk about how the stock market operates and how the economy operates, that is kind of the road we're on. That's where we get modern monetary theory, like what we were talking about before, which is what does money actually dictate? Like how do we measure the value of money? Well, what it measures sometimes in modern monetary theory is just that money is being spent. Money is moving, and because money is moving, money has value. That sounds crazy to some people, but in a lot of ways, that's what the stock market is too. It's like we're not actually investing in a good business. We're just putting money into something that seems more or less volatile.
Yeah.
And then, the more money in that makes it less volatile or more volatile. So it's so separate from productivity, from anything that actually has value. And so what he's trying to do is with this model, since it's already kind of separate from all that stuff, it doesn't really matter any of that stuff, like what the fucking individual companies do. All we're trying to do is track trends within volatility. And he does this with this fractal model. Now, if people know what a fractal model is, it's a mathematical thing where, he takes something at a smaller level and it repeats and replicates the design at a larger level. You could probably see this on YouTube or somewhere where here's what a fractal looks like. You kind of drill down into it, you zoom in and it replicates. It goes on forever. That's what a fractal is. And in his model, it's like you take a section of the volatility of a market, you could actually replicate it long term. So if you take the price of wheat, it's kind of going all over the place. But if you zoom in, the micro volatility more or less measures the larger volatility. And his central point is that the reason you need to do this, it's not just we're doing it for fun. I'm not even saying it's good, but it seems to be the only way to do it. And he says this problem maximizes with globalism, because he's got a chart in the book. I'm going to include this in the clip where he shows like the volatility of the Dow Jones over the 20th century. And you probably know where this is going. You look at it from like 1910 up until 1980. It's pretty stable and standard. A little bit of fluctuations, not much. Then you get to like 1985 and it starts going crazy up and down. So in that sense, he's saying now, if you look at the value of the stock market from one model, you would just see line goes up. And it's true, line is going up. But what you're also seeing is day by day, the volatility is increasing. You get higher peaks and lower values. And like I read this book once. It's called Millionaire Teacher, because I was getting more into investing. And the entire thrust of Millionaire Teacher is just invest in index funds. The entire book, 200 fucking pages. And he's saying invest in index funds, which is investing in the health of the stock market, essentially. And he admits in the book, like, look, some months you're going to be up 9 times and sometimes you're going to be down, but it evens out year over year, which is correct. But there is something to be said for if you measure modern market volatility, it's way off the fucking charts. There's higher peaks, lower valleys. It's like day trading with crypto. So imagine you talk about how crazy crypto is. Well, that actually is the entire economy. And that is mainly because of globalism. That is because there are no controls in place. This is just what you get. So he's saying, well, the best we can do in this model is adopt sort of a fractal view, try to predict it. And he says it's like a black box. He says the economy is like a black box covered in a veil. We know what goes in and something comes out. We don't know the inner workings, but we need to at least stop pretending that we can ever know. Unless we resort back to a more nationalist model and become more, which is what a lot of people like, which is what a lot of people advocate for. There is a strong argument for a more nationalist economic thing. But just to keep it within this globalist model, like this is what you need because things are so erratic and they take such bigger swings and it's so unpredictable on so many different levels that you almost need to just look at it from a strictly naturalistic or mathematical point of view. Like let's pretend money doesn't mean anything. Let's just look at this like we're looking at turbulence or waves or merits. A ferret's mating or some merits. What the fuck is that? And so he said, like, scientists like to view roughness as a corruption on some ideal perfection. That's what scientists like. They like saying nature is perfect balance, and anything that deviates from that is some aberration, like a bell curve or something. He's saying, no. Fractal mathematics views instability as a fundamental force, which is itself unstable. That's the trick. When you see instability as a fundamental force, instability itself is unstable, which is why you have trends. But you can't think that those trends are going to last forever, right? Yeah. See, and this is kind of like, it's almost like a Klein bottle version of thinking, where it's like it kind of loops back on itself. But like this is the only way to make sense of it. Yeah. And he said, and he gives an example of measuring a straight line is simple. The same no matter, what type of ruler you use. Measuring a short straight line is one thing. But if you use that same ruler to measure like the distance of a fucking beach, on like the fucking East Coast or something, the more you use that small unit of measure to measure a long space, you'll get widely varying, types of measurements for how long that beach actually is, right?
Yeah, you're compounding the error, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, you need to put erratic behavior at the center of your worldview, even to the fact where that does not preclude trends. And so that's why he's trying to create this fractal model where you can take a distant model, but also drill down and just see the phenomena. And what a computer can do. You might not know how to build a computer, but that's good enough. And that actually is how a lot of scientists look at this stuff. That's how physics works. Like we know the theory of relativity, and we know that the theory of relativity tends to break down on the quantum level. We know those two things. We don't know exactly how it relates, but we know those things to be true. And even though they don't fit, and just because they don't fit doesn't make them less true. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I like to bring that thinking towards political things. Like we know certain things are true. And just because they don't fit into an ideology doesn't make them less true. I see that a lot on the right as well when it comes to, I won't go in a whole lot. There's a lot of stuff when it comes to human behavior that they'd rather ignore. But the fact of the matter is we have to remind ourselves which things are true. And just because they don't fit into our perfect, holistic, smooth ideology we can't ignore them, right? If we want to design an economic model, let's say, I want to do National Socialism. I want to do communism. I just want to do voluntarism. Like, okay, well, there's certain behaviors that emerge when you think you understand something at a small scale, but once you increase the scale, certain things emerge. And you need to, if not control for that, take that into your design of society. Because I don't think that the way the marketplace is the way it is almost like an experiment. This has never happened before. The global, decentralized, fiat currency marketplace with these huge peaks and valleys has never existed in human history. So what can we learn from that? Because I think even though that's something that's never existed, I think we'll, on a fractal level, we'll still see that in our day-to-day lives, if that makes any sense.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, and I'll show, when I do the clip of this, I'll show some examples of fractals that, you know, from the surface they look chaotic, but they're not really. I just want to do one quote from here before I gotta go. He kind of summarizes it very well. In building a model, start simple. What are the few most important facts about price charts? Step back a long way. Imagine yourself a visitor from another planet, observing the millions of charts we scatter around our newspapers, magazines, television, and the internet. They must be important to us, you deduce. The sheer volume suggests that. But what they mean, how they arise, why they look the way they do, all are mysteries. So you begin by observing carefully. Two obvious facts jump out. One, the prices bounce around a lot, and two, they appear to move in irregular trends. In fact, you hear that some of these Earth dwellers try to gain power over one another by betting on these trends to amass wealth, but they usually lose. The jumps can be quite large indeed. Days of minor fluctuations of less than 1% can be punctuated by great leaps upwards or falls downwards, 3%, 17%, even 40% in a day. That is wild variation, ungovernable and seemingly unpredictable spasms of movement. When you analyze it, you quickly see it does not fit the tidy pattern of a bell curve, known throughout the civilized universe as the epitome of mild, manageable variation. There are too many very big and very small changes, not enough medium-sized ones. And the changes appear to scale with time. The proportion of bigger to smaller price moves follows a regular pattern as you look at monthly, weekly, or daily charts. In fact, if you consider how much the charts wiggle at different timescales, they all look roughly alike and all very bumpy. Now you look at the irregular trends. The size of the price changes clearly cluster together. Big changes often come together in rapid succession, like a fusillade of cannon fire. Then come long stretches of minor changes, like the pop of toy guns. There's scaling here, too. If you zoom in on the individual cluster of big changes, you find it made up of smaller clusters of also big changes. Zoom again, and you find even finer clusters. It's the fractal nature of what you do. Nor is it just the price changes of interest. At times, the price levels also exhibit some kind of irregular regularity. The charts sometimes rise and fall in long waves or with small waves superimposed on bigger waves, but none of this phenomena, clustered volatility or irregular trends, resemble any of the cycles, waves, or other patterns that characterize those aspects of nature controlled through well-established science. There are no familiar sine or cosine waves with regular periods of the kind that undulate evenly across the green screen of an old oscilloscope. These peculiar patterns cannot be predicted, and so the humans who bet on them often lose. Yet there clearly is a system to them. It is as if the charts have a memory of their past. If the price changes start to cluster or the prices themselves start to rise, they have a slight tendency to keep doing so for a while, and then, without warning, they stop. They may even flip to the opposite trend. This is maddening. Our alien, seeing a planet obsessed by such an illogical system, quickly decamps, but his observation of two forms of wildness remain: abrupt change and almost trends. I really liked that quote. I'm like, that kind of summarizes his worldview. Now, again, people might disagree with this worldview. They might disagree with the fractal view of mathematics, but I'd like to put at the forefront of this discussion the idea of unpredictability, of something being unpredictable, being predictably unpredictable, that it'll be random and mixed every time. It won't. And that tells us something about not only nature, but also human endeavors. When human endeavors come together, I think that's kind of where I just wanted to establish that. So what do you think about that, first of all?
Yeah, there's a couple things come to mind. One of them is like history doesn't always repeat, but it does rhyme, like that kind of idea. Or I was also thinking about the history of ice ages. Like they look at ice cores, and it's like there is a pattern up and down of ice ages, and the ice sheets moving up and down but like they don't. In each of those ages, it's different. In each of those ages, it lasts longer or shorter, or the ice has more or less salt in it, or whatever. Like there's, you know what I mean? So I mean, there are patterns there, but they are still unpredictable.
See, this is the thing that, like, change always happens, but bigger changes also happen that negate the previous changes. And this is kind of the liberal worldview, like, oh, we're always changing, but there's some changes that halt change. You know, and we kind of think this is what I wanted to introduce because I do need to get going now. But the idea of, you know, good times make hard times, and hard times make hard guys, and hard guys make good times. You know, that whole cycle of civilizations. I'm like, you know, that is a trend we might have noticed for the past few centuries. Maybe that trend could end, though. You know, I don't want people to keep getting into this idea of the maturation and the evolution of civilizations that were destined to repeat these cycles forever, because even while there are cycles, maybe on a micro level, we could say, there could be giant swings that change the nature of those cycles forever. So from a political standpoint, from a human organizational standpoint, I would say for people to keep that in mind.
Do not let the rapists win. Listen and love Blood Satellite.